This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show with the ongoing crisis at the border. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen defended President Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the southern border Wednesday, telling lawmakers in an explosive hearing that officials are on track to detain more than 900,000 migrants at the U.S. Mexico border this year. Nielsen pushed back against widespread reports the Trump administration routinely denies migrants a chance to apply for asylum in the U.S., claiming no one would be turned away at the U.S. port of entry. This is Nanette Barragan of the House Homeland Security Committee speaking at the hearing.
Either you're lying to this committee or you don't know what's happening at the border.
When she was asked how many children remain detained at the border, Nielsen replied she didn't have the number handy. And she denied that migrant prisoners are being held in cages. This is U.S. Homeland Security Committee Chair Benny Thompson questioning Nielsen.
Just yes or no, are we still putting children in cages?
To my knowledge, CBP never purposely put a child in a cage if you need a cage like this.
Purposely or whatever, are we putting children in cages as of today?
Children are processed at the border facility stations that you've been at. Some of the
And I've seen the cages. I just want you to admit that the cages exist.
Sir, they're not cages.
What are they?
Areas of the border facility that are carved out for the safety and protection of those who remain there while they're being processed.
Our next guest has seen firsthand what our immigration system does to children who come to this country seeking asylum after working as a volunteer interpreter for children in New York immigration court. Valeria Luiselli wrote a celebrated nonfiction book informed by her experience titled Tell Me How It Ends, an essay and 40 questions. She's now out with her fifth book, her first novel written in English, titled Lost Children Archive. Valeria Luiselli, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us and to be here on International Women's Day with you.
Yeah,
the significance, why you wrote Lost Children Archive.
Well, I started writing it on a road trip down to Arizona from New York, and I was trying to write another completely different novel back then about growing up in post-apartheid South Africa. But
you were born in Mexico.
I was born in Mexico, but grew up in several countries, among them South Africa. Right, I arrived in South Africa right when Mandela became president, so it was a very peculiar and beautiful time. I've been trying to write a novel for years about that, which I haven't yet written, really. And I was trying to write it during this trip across the U.S., but the reality in front of me started basically caving in on me. And I started making notes. It was the summer of 2014, exactly when what we can now call the ongoing diaspora of Central Americans fleeing circumstances of unspeakable violence in their countries begun, even though their arrivals began before 2014, but that was the year of the surge. So I started documenting not only traveling across the U.S. in that moment and the landscapes, many times the landscapes of abandonment that I was seeing, but also, of course, the way that the crisis was being recounted and reported on in different states by local newspapers, radio. And so this novel is a novel about immigration, but more than that, it's a novel about how to bear witness and how to tell the story of what I think is going to be one of the most important discussions in the 21st century, which is global diasporas.
And why did you call it Lost Children Archive?
Well, the title, unfortunately, has somehow gained a new meaning now, right? But that is also the power and the elasticity of language. When I first thought of that title, it was my working title in 2014, and I was thinking about children who had lost the right to childhood and children who were not being seen or heard. I was not thinking about children like the children we think of now as lost children who have been lost by this administration's separation policy and having lost track of whose kid is whose parent and are therefore lost within the loop of this system. Unfortunately now, this title also somehow references that what we think of now as lost children.
You write that Lost Children Archive is more a questioning of how and where we should stand in order to document political violence.
Right. I started writing this novel, and And at the same time, as I was writing it, I was working as a volunteer screener and translator in the Court of Immigration here in New York, listening to children's testimonies and stories in an attempt to, among many other volunteers, by the way, in an attempt to get their stories clear and then find a lawyer that might represent them and help them against a deportation order. This was right after the priority docket was created by the Obama administration that basically served as a way to expedite removals of undocumented, unaccompanied children. And so, of course, I started using the novel as a kind of depository or vessel of my own political frustration, rage, sadness, confusion. And I also started really ruining the novel, stuffing it with all of that, while also not really doing justice to the issue. I was trying to thread it into a fictional narrative. And so I stopped writing it altogether. I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, which a book that we've spoken about here before, which is a much more straightforward take, a kind of X-ray of the American immigration system, and also an X-ray of this particular diaspora involving children. And once I wrote that book, I was able to return to the novel and think of it as a space that was more multi-layered and less stuffed, more porous, that reflects on where we should stand to bear witness, and not so much, it's not so much a hammer, a political hammer, as it is a space of reflection about our own space of enunciation when we think about political violence.
You've written about your time as an interpreter, saying that children's stories are always shuffled, stuttered, always shattered beyond the repair of a narrative order. The problem with trying to tell their stories is that it has no beginning, no middle, and no end. So this book is a kind of meditation on storytelling, you have said. Explain.
Well, it is. It's a meditation on the politics of the documentary form, first of all, right? About how where the limits of our right to tell another person's story are. Always confusing limits, right? And it's also a meditation on how we hand down stories to the next generation, accounts of the world, narratives around the world, and how that generation rethreads them, recomposes them, and then also gives them back to us. So it's a family that occupies the first half of the novel, or more than the first half, really, that's traveling down towards the border from New York. And the children are listening to their parents talk about the Chiricahua Apaches, in the case of their father. The mother is talking all the time about how to document the crisis at the border, and they're listening to the news. And the kids start confusing bluecoats with Border Patrol and start reenacting a kind of confused history that's also very telling of the way that history also repeats itself in this country, right? The way that it consistently marginalizes those who it sees as lesser citizens or lesser humans, right? And it's black and brown population, fundamentally.
We're going to do part 2 of this discussion and post it online at democracynow.org. Valeria Luiselli, award-winning Mexican-American writer. Her latest book, Lost Children Archive, was just longlisted for the 2019 Women's Prize for Fiction. Thanks so much for being with us. Happy International Women's Day. I'll be speaking March 15th, next Friday, at East High School in Denver, Colorado. Check our website at democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.